Special Agent Elias Kane sat on a bench near the central fountain of the Northwood Farmers Market, a small basket of strawberries at his side. To any casual observer, he was simply another academic enjoying a weekend, a man with an easy smile and the slightly distracted air of a scholar. His carefully chosen uniform of anonymity consisted of worn loafers, khaki pants, and a bright yellow polo that was cheerful to the point of being forgettable. But Elias was no scholar of history or literature. He was a scholar of human behavior, and his thesis was being written in the shadows. For a long stretch of time, his entire existence had been a meticulously constructed fiction. He was Dr. Aaron Hale, visiting professor of sociology at Northwood University, a man with an invented past, a rented apartment, and a research grant that was actually a funding line from the FBI's counterterrorism division. His true identity as Special Agent Elias Kane, holder of a doctorate in forensic psychology and the Bureau's highest field clearance, was buried so deeply it barely felt real anymore. His mission was to hunt ghosts. He tracked the rumors of an emerging domestic terrorist cell calling itself the Sons of the True Constitution. They were white-collar extremists, accountants, lawyers, and urban planners who believed the federal government was an illegitimate occupying force. They did not build bombs in garages. They planned to cripple infrastructure through cyber attacks and targeted assassinations, cloaking their treason in the language of patriotism. They were invisible, blending into polite society, and the market was their preferred informal meeting ground. Here, a transaction of cash for heirloom carrots could also be an exchange of encrypted data. A discussion about the price of sourdough could be coded language about a potential target. Elias moved through the crowd with ease, posture relaxed, eyes absorbing everything. He was a human data collection machine. He noted the man in the tweed jacket who had been lingering near the same flower stall for a long while without buying, merely watching. He noted the subtle handoff of a folded newspaper between two women pretending to be strangers. His mind processed it all, matching it against the behavioral profiles he had built over months. He was a hunter. But his weapon was not a gun. It was a profound understanding of the subtle signals of human deception. He bought the small basket of strawberries, the transaction part of his cover, the sweet juice, a small genuine pleasure in a life of lies. He found the bench by the fountain, a strategic position with a clear view of three main market thoroughfares. He sat, ate a strawberry, and blended into the landscape. His target that day was a low-level courier, a man named Henderson who worked in the city records office. The Bureau believed Henderson used his access to gather information on the private residences of federal judges. Elias's job was simple: observe Henderson's interactions, log his contacts, and remain a ghost. The sun warmed his face. A child laughed while chasing a pigeon. For a moment, Elias allowed himself to feel the peace of the scene. This was what he fought for, this messy, beautiful, complex tapestry of ordinary life. He had sacrificed his own normality for it. No family, few friends who knew his true self. A life lived in sterile apartments under false names. The weight of the cover was immense. It required a constant, exhausting act of self-censorship. Every word, every gesture, every purchase had to be filtered through the personality of Aaron Hale. There was no room for Elias Kane, the man capable of deconstructing a suspect's entire psyche in a short conversation, the man who had graduated at the top of his class. A police cruiser rolled slowly along the street bordering the market. Elias's gaze tracked it instinctively. He noted the passenger, young and bored-looking. The driver was older, heavier, with a sour expression visible even from a distance. Elias cataloged the observation and dismissed it. Local police were a known variable, a constant in the operational environment, but not a direct concern. His mission was federal. His profile had been scrubbed from any system they could access. To them, if they ever checked his false ID, he was simply a professor. He finished the strawberries and set the empty basket aside. He spotted Henderson across the plaza speaking with a baker. The interaction lasted only a brief moment, a short nod. Henderson bought a baguette and walked away. It was subtle. It was perfect. Elias noted the details in his memory. The day's mission objective was complete. Now he only needed to melt back into the crowd, return to his apartment, and transmit his report through encrypted channels. He stood, stretched his back, and turned to leave. An unremarkable man in a yellow shirt, already focused on the complex task of translating today's observations into actionable intelligence. He had no idea that his meticulously crafted invisibility was about to be shattered, not by a terrorist, but by the very system he had sworn to protect. As Ellis turned to rejoin the flow of shoppers, a sound cut through the pleasant atmosphere of the market. It was a woman's scream, sharp and charged with genuine panic. "My purse! He took my purse!" Every head in the plaza turned toward the source of the cry. A middle-aged woman in expensive athletic wear pointed with a trembling finger. Her face was a mask of distress. Her accusation, however, was vague, not directed at any specific person, but at the general chaos of the crowd. People froze. A wave of alarm rippled through the market. Shoppers clutched their bags tighter, eyes darting in every direction, searching for a culprit, a threat. Elias, slipping back into training, began scanning immediately. His mind, which moments earlier had been powering down, now raced at full speed. He assessed the threat, identified the players, controlled the environment. He analyzed the woman's posture, the direction of her gaze, the flow of people around her. She was pointing toward a narrow alley between two produce stalls through which a dozen people were walking. The thief, if there was one, could have been any of them. I was a professional observer and had seen nothing. No sudden movement, no suspicious exchange, no one running. This suggested either a skilled pickpocket or, equally likely, a false alarm. The woman might simply have misplaced her bag. His thoughts were a rapid sequence of logical deductions, but logic was about to become irrelevant. From the edge of the market, a figure detached from the patrol car Elias had noted earlier. Officer Garrett Pike, badge number 7C34, moved with a purpose that centered less on serving and protecting than on asserting dominance. He was a solidly built man with a thick neck that bulged over the collar of his uniform. His face was flushed, eyes small and permanently narrowed, as if regarding the entire world with suspicion and contempt. He had been a cop for years, and in that time his idealism had curdled into a potent mixture of cynicism and racial animosity. To Pike, the world was a simple dichotomy, predators and prey, and his job was to cage the predators. Yet his definition of predator was tragically, predictably limited. He strode toward the screaming woman, hand already resting on the butt of his holstered Glock. His younger partner, Officer Riley Quinn, hurried to catch up, looking nervous and uncertain. Quinn had been on the force only a short time and still clung to the idea that policing was about helping people. He lived in a state of constant anxiety, terrified of Pike's temper and the casual brutality he witnessed daily. "What happened, ma'am? What did he look like?" Pike asked in a low growl meant to be comforting, but sounding impatient. "I don't know. It happened so fast," the woman cried hysterically. "He was there, and now my purse is gone." Pike scanned the crowd. He was not looking for evidence. He was looking for a target that fit his preconceived narrative. His gaze swept over white faces, elderly faces, families with strollers. He was following a pattern, but it was not a pattern of criminal behavior. It was a pattern of skin color. His eyes locked on Elias Kane. Elias stood motionless, observing with a neutral posture, but to Pike he was an anomaly. A black man alone, not actively shopping but watching, and wearing a bright yellow shirt. A splash of color that in Pike's mind was a display of arrogance. It drew attention. It was a challenge. In that single toxic moment, Pike's mind connected the woman's unfocused panic with the man who did not fit his image of this quiet, predominantly white market. The entire investigation, from start to finish, took place entirely within the confines of his own intolerance. "You!" Pike shouted, pointing a thick finger at Elias. "Yellow shirt! Don't move!" The order was so sudden, so baseless, that for a fraction of a second, Elias thought he had misheard. He was a good distance from the woman. He had not moved. He had done nothing. But the officer was advancing on him, parting the crowd like a shark through a school of fish. People stepped back, faces mixing fear and morbid curiosity. They cleared a space, creating an improvised arena. Elias felt a cold spike of adrenaline, a sensation he had not felt in years. It was not fear. It was the icy clarity of a compromised mission. A police confrontation variable, unexplained, random, and biased. His mind rapidly reviewed protocols. Maintain cover, de-escalate, do not reveal operational status unless facing imminent mortal danger. The problem was that the protocol had been written to deal with rational actors. From Pike's gait and the set of his jaw, Elias could deduce that rationality was not in play. "Sir, I believe there's been a misunderstanding," Elias began in a calm, serene voice, the voice of Dr. Aaron Hale, the harmless academic. "Shut your mouth," Pike growled, closing the distance until he invaded Elias's personal space. The officer was shorter than Elias, but compensated with an aggressive, forward-leaning posture. He smelled of stale coffee and cheap cigars. "You think you can just walk in here and help yourself in my city?" The accusation was absurd. It was a fantasy built from pure prejudice. The woman had never identified him. There was no evidence. There was nothing but a cop who had found the answer he was looking for before the question had even been fully formed. Officer Quinn arrived a moment later, breathing hard, eyes wide as he looked from his partner to the calm man in the yellow shirt. "Garrett," Quinn whispered, "we don't even know." "I know," Pike said, gaze locked on Elias. He did not break eye contact. It was a dominant strategy, an intimidation tactic. "I know exactly what I see." In that moment, the quiet farmer's market ceased to be a place of commerce and community. It became the stage for a drama of injustice, and Elias Kane, the ghost agent, had just been cast in the lead role against his will. The world seemed to shrink. The ambient noise of the market faded into a dull roar, concentrating on the narrow, claustrophobic space between the two men. Elias Kane, the man trained to read micro-expressions and predict human behavior with unsettling accuracy, was now the object of the most primitive analysis possible, judgment by skin color. He could see the approaching storm in Officer Pike's eyes. It was not the focused intensity of an investigator seeking truth, but the wild, irrational fury of a bigot who felt his authority was being challenged. "Sir," Elias said, consciously keeping his voice modulated, hands open and visible at his sides. This was textbook de-escalation strategy. Demonstrate you are not a threat. Use a calm tone. Address the officer with respect. "My name is Dr. Aaron Hale. I'm a university professor. I assure you I haven't done anything." I used his false identity, the name of the harmless academic. It was supposed to be a shield, a social credential to calm the situation. But for Pike, it was fuel on the fire. "A doctor?" Pike asked with disdain, a cruel smile twisting his lips. He let out a short bark of laughter and glanced back at the audience, performing for his crowd. "You hear that? We got ourselves a college boy. What kind of doctor are you? Wallet-stealing doctor? Pickpocket doctor?" The insult was crude, designed to humiliate, to strip Elias of the credibility he was trying to establish. "I teach sociology," Elias answered. Ignoring the provocation, he decided to change tactics. If direct denial was not working, perhaps logic would. After all, he was a genius. His mind operated on a plane of reason that men like Pike could not comprehend. He would not treat this as a confrontation, but as a flawed logical problem that needed correcting. "Officer," Elias continued, shifting his tone to one of helpful analysis, as if they were colleagues solving a puzzle. "Consider the situation. The woman is there." He made a subtle gesture with his head, avoiding any sudden movement that could be misinterpreted as aggression. "For me to have taken her purse and returned to this spot without anyone noticing in the crowd would have required incredible speed and stealth. Additionally, I would still have the purse in my possession. You can search me. I have my keys, my phone, and my own wallet." I was laying out the facts clearly and simply. He was offering a solution. It was an impeccable argument, and it was the worst thing he could have said. To Pike, this calm, articulate breakdown was not a sign of innocence. It was profound disrespect. This man was not cowering. He was not begging. I was talking down to him, using big words and logic as if he were the one in charge. It was an intellectual challenge from a man Pike already considered inferior, and it was infuriating. "You think you're smart, don't you?" Pike's voice dropped, losing its theatrical bravado and taking on a quiet, dangerous threat. He stepped even closer, his chest nearly brushing Elias's. "You think you can talk your way out of this with your fancy professor words? I've seen people like you before. Arrogant, entitled, thinking the rules don't apply to you. Your kind." The phrase hung in the air, dense and ugly. The subtext was now text. This was no longer about a stolen purse. It never had been. Officer Quinn, standing just behind Pike, looked increasingly agitated. He could see where this was going. He had seen it before. Pike would push and push until he got a reaction, any reaction, that he could then use as justification for violence. "Garrett, maybe we should just pat him down like he said," Quinn suggested meekly. "If he's clean, we can—" "Stay out of this, Quinn," Pike snapped without turning his head. His attention was completely fixed on Elias. "The kid's soft," he told Elias as if sharing a private joke. "He still believes people are innocent, but I've been doing this a long time. I can smell guilt. And you, Doctor, you reek of it." Elias felt a cold, hard knot form in his stomach. It was a vicious cycle of rage. Every calm denial was interpreted as arrogance. Every logical statement was seen as a challenge. He was in a logical trap, a classic double bind where the act of defending oneself is taken as proof of guilt. His analytical mind, his greatest asset, had become a liability. He was speaking sense to a man who only understood the grammar of force. "Hi, Maud, one final attempt," directing his words not at Pike but at the silent partner. "Officer Quinn, I formally declare that I am not resisting. I am willing to submit to a search. I simply want to understand the probable cause for my detention." It was a perfectly legal and reasonable question, and it was the final straw. Pike's face darkened to a deep, mottled red. "Probable cause?" he whispered, voice trembling with fury. "You want to see my probable cause?" He reached down and his hand closed around the handle of the black, steel-reinforced baton clipped to his belt. The click of the baton releasing from its holster was sickeningly loud in the sudden silence of the market square. "My probable cause," Pike said with a terrifying gleam in his eyes, "is that I don't like your face." The appearance of the baton changed the atmosphere instantly. The crowd's morbid curiosity transformed into palpable fear. This was no longer a tense but still civil police interaction. It was on the brink of violence. The polished steel of the baton seemed to absorb the bright sunlight, a dark promise in Officer Pike's hand. He did not raise it yet. He held it at his side, tapping it rhythmically against his thigh, like a predator twitching its tail before the pounce. Elias's mind was a whirlwind of calculations. Threat assessment was critical. Officer Pike was emotionally compromised and seeking physical confrontation. Officer Quinn was not a factor, intimidated into compliance. Public witnesses were present but passive. Protocols were clear: do not reveal identity. But the unspoken clause to that rule was survival. The mission was paramount, but useless if the agent was dead or incapacitated. "All right, enough." Pike's voice was now flat, stripped of the earlier theatrical anger. It had been replaced by a cold, procedural tone that somehow felt more terrifying. "Let's see some identification. Driver's license. Now." This was the decisive moment, the crucible. Everything narrowed to a single demand. Elias had identification. In his wallet was a perfect state driver's license in the name of Dr. Aaron Hale, with a valid address and a backstory supported by a dozen digital breadcrumbs planted by the Bureau's tech division. Handing it over was the logical, compliant thing to do. It was what any innocent person would do. But Elias Kane was not innocent in that sense. He was an undercover federal agent. Handing over the identification, even the false one, would initiate a process. They would run the name. It would come back clean, linked to the university, but it would create a record. A police report would be filed. Dr. Aaron Hale, detained and questioned in connection with the theft. That report, however insignificant, would be etched into the history of his cover. If the terrorist cell he was investigating ever conducted a thorough background check, that flag, an interaction with local law enforcement, could be enough to raise suspicion and compromise the entire multi-million-dollar operation. It could get people killed. His internal debate was intense. It lasted barely a microsecond, but felt like an eternity. Option A, present the ID. Pike would likely find nothing, but the cover was already marked. The operation was at risk. Option B, refuse or delay. Pike would interpret this as resistance, escalating the situation to almost certain violence, but operational integrity remained intact. He was trapped between personal safety and professional duty. For Elias Kane, there was never really a choice. The mission always came first. "I do not consent to searches, and I am not carrying identification," Elias declared. It was a partial lie. He had the wallet in his pocket, but it was necessary. I was just taking a walk. I don't believe I'm required to carry ID unless I'm operating a motor vehicle. I was legally correct. In this state, there was no stop and identify law requiring pedestrians to produce ID in this context. It was another example of calm, exasperating logic. Pike's eyes widened, first with disbelief, then with triumph. This was the gift he had been waiting for. This was the justification. "Refusing to identify yourself," he announced loudly for the benefit of the crowd and for his partner's future report. "You're now obstructing my investigation." "There is no investigation," Elias replied, voice still steady, though he could feel his heart hammering against his ribs. "You have a hysterical witness who did not identify me and a suspect who has offered to be searched. You're creating a situation where none exists." "I'm creating it?" Pike took half a step back, squared his shoulders, and puffed out his chest. He was creating space, a classic pre-attack indicator. "I'm the one keeping this market safe from thugs like you. Now, one last time, give me your identification." "I don't have it," Elias repeated, jaw tightening. He prepared subtly, shifting his weight onto the balls of his feet, bracing for the impact he knew was coming. He could disarm Pike in less than 2 seconds, break his wrist with an elbow lock, take the baton, and put him on the ground before Quinn could even draw his weapon. The training was a primary instinct screaming at him to act, to neutralize the threat. But he could not. The moment he used his specialized training, the image of Dr. Aaron Hale, the clumsy academic, would be instantly destroyed. His cover would be irrevocably blown. His violence would confirm everything Pike claimed. He had to be the victim. It was the only strategy left to him. "Then you're coming with me," Pike declared. He reached for Elias's arm. Instinctively, Elias took a small step back, pulling his arm from the grasp. It was a natural human reaction, a reflexive rejection of unwanted contact. But in the twisted legal fiction Pike was constructing, it was a capital offense. "He's resisting!" Pike shouted, a clear signal to Quinn and anyone else watching. "The suspect is resisting arrest." He did not wait for Quinn. He did not attempt proper handcuffing techniques. The demand for identification had been a farce, a final checkpoint on the road to violence. Elias's refusal had given him the green light. He raised the baton, gripping it with both hands, knuckles white. Sunlight glinted off the steel. The crowd gasped. Elias turned his body slightly, protecting his head and vital organs as best he could without looking like a trained fighter. He had made his decision. He would protect the mission. He could only hope to survive long enough to complete it. The first blow came in an instant. Pike, channeling years of repressed rage and prejudice into a single violent act, swung the steel baton with the unrestrained force of a lumberjack. It was not a controlled police maneuver designed to subdue. It was a savage, punitive strike meant to injure. Crack. The sound was obscene, a dull, wet impact that echoed through the now silent market. The baton struck Elias full in the ribs just below the left arm. The impact was an explosion of searing agony. It felt as if his entire side had been shattered. A sharp, involuntary grunt forced the air from his lungs. For a moment, the world went gray at the edges. His vision darkened. The pain was blinding, absolute. He staggered sideways. The composure he had maintained so carefully fractured under the physical assault. His training screamed at him to stay on his feet, not to show vulnerability, but his body betrayed him. "Garrett, no!" Officer Quinn cried, voice thin and useless against the storm of his partner's violence. He stepped forward, hand outstretched, but it was too late and too timid. Pike ignored him. The first blow had broken some internal barrier. He was high on the adrenaline of dominance. His face was a mask of primal fury. He saw Elias stumble, and it was like blood in the water. He saw weakness, and he lunged. "Resisting, huh?" Pike growled, voice guttural, saliva flecking his lips. "I'll give you something to resist." He struck again. This time the baton caught Elias across the right shoulder blade as he tried to turn. A different pain seized him, a deep tearing agony as steel crushed muscle against bone. The bright yellow fabric of his polo offered no protection. Elias's arm went numb, a dead weight at his side. He staggered again, legs turning to rubber. He could hear the crowd screaming, a chorus of horror and disbelief, but it sounded distant, as if coming from underwater. His mind was still functioning, a frantic flickering light in a sea of pain. He was documenting, 2 strikes. Left ribs, right scapula, excessive force, assault under color of law. He was building the case against his attacker even as the attack was underway. It was a strange, detached act of survival instinct, the only form of self-defense he was permitted. He saw the woman who had first screamed about her purse. She stood near a fruit stand, hands covering her mouth, eyes wide with terror. He saw the regret and horror on her face. She had lit a match, and Pike had used it to start a wildfire. Pike was not finished. He was frenzied. He advanced on the wounded, staggering Elias. "On your knees," he screamed, voice cracking with rage. "Get on the ground now!" Elias could not have obeyed, even if he wanted to. His legs no longer answered his commands. He was trying to stay upright, trying to breathe, trying to force air back into his ruined lungs. He raised his uninjured arm, a universal gesture of surrender, of non-aggression. Pike interpreted it as a challenge. "Still want to fight?" he roared. The third blow was aimed at Elias's head, the killing shot, the strike every police academy in the country explicitly forbids unless an officer is facing a lethal threat. Elias saw it coming. In that fraction of a second time seemed to stretch. He knew that if the blow landed on his temple or the base of his skull, the mission would not merely be compromised, it would be over. His life would be over. With a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, he managed to twist his body and duck his head. The baton did not strike his skull, but it crashed into his cheekbone with devastating force. Crunch. The sound was sickeningly intimate. He felt the bone give way. A nova of pain exploded behind his eye, and the world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of fractured light and overwhelming nausea. Finally, his legs folded. He fell, not with a stumble, but like a puppet with its strings cut, collapsing onto the hard cobblestones of the market square. His head struck the ground with a dull thud. The last thing he saw before darkness consumed him was Pike standing over him, chest heaving, baton raised like a trophy. The officer's face was a grotesque caricature of triumph. Then nothing. Silence. The carefully constructed world of Dr. Aaron Hale, the meticulous facade of Special Agent Elias Kane, had been brutally erased. All that remained was an unconscious, broken man in a blood-stained yellow shirt lying at the feet of a monster with a badge. The verdict had not been delivered by a jury, but by 3 swift, savage blows of a steel baton. For a moment after Elias collapsed, an uneasy silence gripped the plaza. The violence had been so sudden, so brutal, that it seemed to have stolen the breath from the square. The crowd stood frozen, a gallery of horrified statues. Then the spell broke, and the silence was replaced by a wave of frantic noise, gasps, sobs, and a growing murmur of angry, fearful voices. Officer Garrett Pike stood over the motionless body of Elias, breathing hard, chest rising and falling like a blacksmith's bellows. The adrenaline of the assault still coursed through him, leaving a copper taste in his mouth. He looked down at the man he had just beaten unconscious. Blood was pooling beneath Elias's head, a dark halo on the pale gray cobblestones. The left side of his face was already beginning to swell, a grotesque distortion of his features. Pike felt a flicker of something. Not remorse, but a cold, pragmatic concern for his own well-being. He had gone too far. He knew it. The crowd had seen it. He needed to control the narrative, and he needed to do it now. "He's faking," Pike announced to no one in particular, voice loud and defensive. He nudged Elias's leg with the toe of his boot. There was no response. The man was completely out. "Fought me the whole way." He turned to his partner. Officer Quinn's face was ash gray. Quinn stared at Elias, mouth slightly open, while the chapters of his training manuals on continuous use of force burned in his mind. "Quinn, you saw it," Pike said in a low, authoritarian growl. "He resisted. He tried to hit me. I had to defend myself." It was a bald-faced, monstrous lie. Quinn opened his mouth to protest, to say, "No, that's not what happened." But the words stuck in his throat. He looked at Pike's face, the cold fury still burning in his eyes, and fear won. He thought of his career, his student loans, the internal affairs complaints Pike had made disappear for other officers. He thought of the unwritten rule, you back your partner, no matter what. He gave a brief nod, a silent, soul-crushing act of complicity. "Yeah, Garrett," Quinn murmured, eyes fixed on the ground. "He resisted." "Good," Pike grunted. He finally holstered his baton and knelt beside Elias. Not to render aid, but to complete the performance of a lawful arrest. He grabbed Elias's limp arms, yanking them roughly behind his back to handcuff him. The metallic click of the cuffs was brutally loud. He was cuffing an unconscious man. It was an act of pure procedural theater designed for the report he was already writing in his head. "Call it in," Pike ordered Quinn. "Code 99, officer needs assistance. Suspect in custody. Tell them to send a bus and a supervisor." He deliberately used bus, the term for ambulance, to suggest that medical attention was a priority, another brushstroke in his manufactured masterpiece. While Quinn clumsily worked his radio, voice trembling as he transmitted the false information, Pike began searching Elias's body. He patted the pockets with rough, indifferent hands. He felt the rectangular shape of the wallet. An ugly, triumphant smile spread across his face. "Well, well, well, look what we have here," he said loudly, pulling the thin leather wallet from Elias's pocket. He held it up for the crowd to see. "Says he doesn't have identification. A liar as well as a thief." He opened the wallet. Inside, he found a few hundred in cash, some credit cards, and the pristine driver's license of Dr. Aaron Hale. He looked at the photo, then at Elias's ruined face. "Dr. Aaron Hale," he read the name with dripping sarcasm. "Looks like your teaching days are over, Professor." A woman in the crowd, a brave soul with a smartphone held high, shouted, "You beat him. He didn't do anything." Pike's head snapped up, scanning the faces until he found her. "You didn't see what I saw, ma'am," he growled. "This man is a violent criminal. You want people like this walking around near your kids?" He waved the wallet. "And what about her?" He pointed to the woman who had lost her purse. "We forgetting about the victim." The mention of the original crime was a clever, if cynical, maneuver to redirect attention. It was then that a child pointed at the ground near the fruit stand where the woman still stood. "Look," the child said. "There it is." Partially under the wooden display, almost invisible in the shadows, lay the woman's purse. She must have set it down for a moment and forgotten it. In the chaos that followed, no one had noticed. A wave of understanding washed over the crowd. The entire premise of this brutal assault collapsed in an instant. The woman who had screamed now stood frozen, hands still covering her mouth, the color draining from her face as the truth settled over her. She had lost her own bag. No one had stolen anything. The man lying broken on the cobblestones had done nothing at all. Yet the damage was already done. The handcuffs were locked. The blood was real. And the narrative Pike needed was already taking shape in his mind. At the station, the booking process began under the watchful eye of Lieutenant Vance Harlan, a man who had spent years protecting the department's image by burying complaints and shielding officers like Pike. When the fingerprint scanner locked up the moment Elias's thumb touched the glass, triggering a system-wide lockdown and a demand for a federal technician, Harlan's unease turned to genuine alarm. The strange word the prisoner had murmured in a moment of semi-consciousness, chimera, set off quiet alarms in the mind of Detective Nora Croft, an outsider in the department who had long kept her own discreet records of its dirty laundry. Using her credentials, she accessed a secure federal portal and entered the keyword. The response that appeared on her screen chilled her blood. Chimera protocol active. Asset in hostile territory. Are you friend or foe? In the FBI's Watchtower Operations Center, Director Elias Crow stood before a wall of glowing screens as the Chimera Protocol transformed an ordinary day into a full-scale crisis. The vital signs from Elias's nearly microscopic subdermal tracker showed an elevated but stable heart rate. He was alive. That was the good news. The bad news was that he was in the hands of men who had beaten him for the color of his skin. Oracle, the young cyber warfare specialist, was already deep inside the station's primitive network. Within minutes, she held complete administrative control, communications, security, records, even the climate systems. The fourth precinct had become an island, cut off from the outside world. Every dashboard camera, every body cam recording, every email Lieutenant Harlan had ever sent was being copied to secure federal servers with triple redundancy. When Harlan and Pike attempted to wipe the surveillance footage, the system locked them out. Green text appeared on the black screen. Data integrity is the property of the United States Department of Justice. Tampering is a federal offense. Your actions have been logged. In desperation, they yanked the power cables, plunging the server room into darkness. Believing they had destroyed the truth, they had no idea the evidence already lived safely in the cloud. The sound of heavy rotor blades soon filled the air. Two unmarked Black Hawk helicopters hovered low over the building, while armored Suburbans formed a tactical perimeter on the ground. The FBI hostage rescue team moved with lethal precision. The station doors were breached in a single coordinated strike. Flashbangs detonated. Red laser dots danced across the chests of the local officers. Within moments, the entire precinct was on its knees, hands behind heads, weapons confiscated. Detective Nora Croft, hands raised to show she was no threat, led two HRT operators to the basement isolation cell. The lock was forced. Light flooded the small dark space. Elias looked up from the floor, face a swollen, discolored ruin, yet his eyes remained sharp and lucid. "My name is Kane," he said in a hoarse voice. "Special Agent Elias Kane. And I believe you are Detective Croft. Thank you for your help." The operators helped him to his feet with surprising gentleness and supported him as he limped upstairs. When he stepped into the main bullpen, a profound silence fell. Every HRT operator, every kneeling local officer, every federal agent flooding into the building turned to look at him. His expensive polo was torn and blood-stained. His face was a grotesque mask of bruises. He was the living evidence of the crime that had been committed. The HRT team leader approached and offered a crisp nod. "Agent Kane, Section Chief, the director sends his regards. A medical team is on the way." "Thank you," Elias replied. "But first, we clean house." His gaze found Lieutenant Harlan and Officer Pike, both in flex cuffs, faces a mixture of disbelief and pure terror. From a speaker an agent had set up, Director Crow's deep voice filled the lobby. "Lieutenant Harlan told my agent there was no evidence. He claimed the body camera malfunctioned and the servers crashed. He is a liar." The large flat screen on the wall flickered to life. High-definition footage from Pike's dash camera played for the entire room. They watched Elias in the market, calm and polite. They watched Pike approach, aggressive and hostile. They heard every dismissive insult, every racial slur. Then came the assault, the amplified cracks and crunches of the baton strikes, the brutal, unjustified violence in full detail. They saw Elias fall unconscious. They saw Pike cuff the inert body and plant the wallet. The local officers who had only heard Pike's version stared in horror. They had been lied to. They had been made complicit in the cover-up of a monstrous crime. The screen shifted to the grainy security footage from the server room. They watched Harlan and Pike frantically trying to delete the files. They heard Harlan scream, "Unplug it! Kill it!" When the video ended, Director Crow's voice returned, cold and hard as a glacier. "Officer Garrett Pike is under arrest for aggravated assault, perjury, and violation of civil rights under color of law. Lieutenant Vance Harlan is under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering. These are federal charges. There will be no bail." Pike finally broke. A raw, animal sob escaped his lips. "I didn't know," he moaned, tears and mucus running down his face. "I didn't know who he was if I had known he was FBI." Elias limped forward until his shadow fell over the weeping, defeated officer. He leaned close. "That's the point," he whispered in a dangerously low voice. "It shouldn't have mattered who I was. You did this because you believed I was nobody. You did this because you believed you could get away with it." He straightened. "Take them away." As two HRT operators hauled Pike and Harlan out of the building. They had once ruled. Elias looked at the remaining officers still on their knees, heads bowed in shame. "This station is now under FBI command," he announced, his voice carrying an authority that had nothing to do with rank and everything to do with moral clarity. "And the first order of business is a complete audit of every case these two men ever touched. The cleaning begins now." The reign of terror at the 4th Precinct was over. In the sterile, wood-paneled courtroom sometime later, the air was still and heavy with anticipation. In the gallery, a strange mix of people sat together. Detective Nora Croft, now interim chief of the precinct, sat beside the woman from the market whose misplaced purse had started it all. Both were there to testify. At the defense table, Garrett Pike and Vance Harlan were almost unrecognizable. No longer the arrogant, swaggering bullies who had dominated a police station. They were pale, haggard men in ill-fitting suits, their confidence replaced by the hollow-eyed fear of those facing the abyss. Elias Kane sat in the front row directly behind the prosecution. He wore a simple dark gray suit. The swelling in his face had long since faded, but a fine, faint scar remained on his cheekbone, a permanent silver reminder of the assault. His ribs had healed, yet on cold mornings he still felt a dull ache, another reminder. The jury had already returned its verdict, guilty on all counts. Only the sentencing remained. Judge Esther Williams looked down from the bench, her gaze fixed on the two defendants. "I have read the victim impact statements," she said, her voice filling the silence of the room. "I have reviewed the evidence, and I must say that in all my years on this bench, I have rarely seen so flagrant and malicious an abuse of the public trust." She turned her attention to Pike. "Mr. Pike, your attorney argues this was a momentary lapse. The video evidence suggests otherwise. It shows a man who took pleasure in violence. A man who viewed his badge not as a shield to protect the innocent, but as a sword to punish those he deemed unworthy. You did not merely break Mr. Kane's bones. You broke the oath you swore to this city." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, I sentence you to the maximum penalty. You were the rot in the foundation. For your role in the conspiracy and obstruction, I sentence you to a lengthy term." Pike and Harlan were not anomalies. They were symptoms of a disease. Elias's phone vibrated with a message from Nora Croft. The city council had just approved the settlement. It was not enough, but it was a beginning. He replied with a simple line, "A beginning is good. Keep fighting, Commander." The city had been forced to pay for its sins. Pike and Harlan were caged. Justice, at its slow and exhausting pace, had been delivered. Yet Elias knew the deeper truth. He had won not only because he was an FBI agent, but because he had access to a structure of power that could strike back. And the others, the countless men and women who had no Chimera protocol to call upon, who lacked the full weight of the Bureau behind them, their stories were the ones that kept him awake at night. He had endured the beating to protect his mission. In doing so, he had also exposed a cancer. The memory of the pain had faded, but the memory of the injustice remained a fire that would drive him through the next cover, the next mission, and the next. The scars were a reminder that the war against the darkness within is fought not only in foreign lands, but on the sunlit streets of our own cities, one act of courage at a time. And so our story ends. For once, the system worked. A monster was caged, a corrupt house was cleaned, justice was done. Yet the victory feels complex, does it not? Elias Kane, the ghost agent, had to be physically broken before the truth could be revealed. A hard reminder that the scales of justice are not always balanced. He returns to the shadows carrying the scars of a battle he never should have had to fight, forever changed by the hatred he was forced to endure. The city of Northwood begins a long and painful process of healing, led by a new commander who understands that trust, once broken, must be rebuilt piece by piece. The powerful machinery of the FBI moves on to its next target, leaving behind a warning of what happens when unchecked power collides with unyielding principle. What do you think of the sentence? Was it enough for what Officer Pike did? Or is any length of time enough to pay for so deep a betrayal of trust? And what does it say about our society that it takes a secret agent with the full power of the government to obtain justice for an act of brutality that happens far too often to ordinary people? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story of hard-won accountability moved you, please show your support by liking and subscribing to the channel. Your engagement helps us continue sharing stories that matter.